Okay, so next we need to paint weights. And that's going to create this smooth transition on these meshes. It would look a little bit better if I were to go ahead and just smooth the mesh, but we don't want to rely on that. It doesn't look very realistic. If you're having trouble selecting things when you've created joints, that's because there's a selection priority. And joints have priority over meshes. So if you click on a mesh with a joint inside of it, it's going to select that joint, even though you just clicked on a mesh. So that can be pretty annoying to a beginner. Okay, now here's where we're glad that we did some renaming. But also, let me go ahead and show you how to edit some stuff here. So if I select a mesh, and let's say I added too many influence objects to this backpack, which I did, because the backpack doesn't need to be controlled by the elbow joints. Okay, it may need to be affected by the shoulder, but probably not too much by the shoulder. But it certainly, I don't think it needs to be affected by the hips joint either. And so first of all, let's see a list of all of its influence objects. So we'll right click on this mesh and we'll go to paint. Then we have a skin cluster. And we have two different skin clusters right here. One's the backpack, one's tassel. We want to look at the backpack skin cluster. And then if over here on the left in my toolbox, if I double click this, I'll get this tool settings, which you guys have been seeing a lot with your move manipulators, your rotate and scale, except this time it looks completely different. Okay, so this is a list of its influence objects. So right now, hips, torso base, torso mid, shoulders, clavicle left, clavicle right, shoulder right, neck base are all affecting or possibly affecting the backpack. Well, neck base does not need to affect the backpack. Okay, and looks like it sort of did a good job actually. It eliminated the elbows from the list. So that's good. May not have to do as much editing as I thought. Well, let me force it just so you guys can see. So let's say I want head base to affect the backpack. So I can go to skinning. And I have not looked in this menu since they changed it. Add influence to the option box. And in here, we're not using geometry at all. Drop off could be 1. We want to lock weights and set it to 0. That means we can add it as an influence object to the backpack without giving it any weight information, because we don't want it to edit what's already been done. So we'll click apply. Now if I click on the backpack and press Y to get back to my paint weights tool, head base comes in, it's in the list, and it's locked, which is what I told it to do. Okay, now you don't understand what locked means yet, but it will be useful. So we're going to undo because I didn't really want to add the base, that head base joint. Okay. Now, if it had extra influences, so like hips, for instance, I could select the hips joint, switch to my selection tool, select the backpack, go to the skinning menu again, and this time I want to remove influence. So now that hips joint is no longer going to be affecting the mesh. It's not listed any longer. Okay, so we want to limit these because the less influence objects that we have, the more easy this is going to be to edit. Okay, so that's how to add and remove influences. Now, actually painting the weights. Let's work on the leg first. First thing you need to know is that you could adjust the weighting mathematically if you want to. So if you select a group of vertices, let's turn off joints for now. So if you select a group of vertices, then each vertex holds some weighting information. This is important for you to understand. So if you go to Window, General Editors, Component Editor, and then you select the Smooth Skins tab, you're going to see a list of vertices, VTX 12. Okay, they each of them is special, has its own number, and it tells you of the ones that I have selected. So let me just select one. So that's Vertex 77. Vertex 77 is controlled by the hip bind joint, and it's controlled 1 or 100% by that hip joint. If I select another vertice, this vertice, Vertex 14, is controlled also 100% by the hip. If I come down here, the Vertex 83 is controlled 100% by the knee. Well, if I select these, then it shows me hip and knee joint. And some of these are controlled by the knee, some of them are controlled by the hip, but they always total 1 or 100%. I know I'm maybe overly simplifying this, but this is important. When the total is 1, it means that it is normalized. Okay. Now, if I go to the left leg skin, I can tell it to turn off this normalize weights. And now I'm going to do this just so I can show you what happens if your weighting is not normalized. So if I let's select this vertice. And if I change its value to 0.5, its total is no longer 0.5. It's no longer 1, it's 0.5. Well, a vertice that doesn't have a total of 1 is going to try to go to the origin of the scene, right here. Okay. So that's not good. So we can put it back. Now, if I give this more than 100% influence, say do 1.5, the opposite happens. It's going to shoot off just opposite of the origin of the scene. So we can't see it very well. But there it is, shot up right there. So that's also bad. So we need these weights to be normalized. Turn that value back to 1. Now by default, this normalized weights, I told you guys to leave it to interactive. That's what you want to do. Now if you do that, did I close that window? I guess I did. So we go back there. So there's my vertex. It's controlled by the bind left knee. There are other available influence objects though, and right now the options are telling it to be hidden. So I can uncheck this hide 0 columns, and then I'll see a list of all the possible influence objects for that vertice. So remember that normalized weights is set to interactive right now. So anytime I make a change, it's going to change the other weighting information so that the total is always 1. So if I want this to blend and be controlled 50% by the hip and 50% by the knee, then I can change this to 0.5 and press enter. And as soon as I tab and leave that cell, you can see that it updated the knee to 0.5 for a grand total of 100% or 1. Okay. So you can adjust, you can do all of your weighting right here in this component editor. Okay. And believe it or not, there's some artists that choose to do that. It's actually not that bad as it may seem in first appearances. So I do use this, is what I'm getting at. Okay, so I'm going to set that back to 1 for now and close this. Now there's another way to adjust that, and that's the Paint Skin Weights tool. So I press Y to get back to that here. Then I can select one of these influence objects, and it's going to show that portion of the mesh to me that is being controlled by that influence object by turning it white. So the white portion of the mesh is controlled 100% by the hip joint. If I select the knee, the lower portion is controlled 100% by the knee joint. Now, because I've told max influences to be set to 1, or not max influences, but the number of influences allowed was 1 when I did my smooth skin bind. It's either, each vertex is going to either be black or white, 100% or none at all. Now, I need to start blending these. So the best thing to do when you're blending, let me switch which leg I'm working on. Turn off this X-ray mode. And I'm going to select this knee joint, middle mouse click. That just temporarily puts me into the rotate tool, and I can rotate this back. Just about 52 degrees. It doesn't matter how much, just enough to be able to tell how when you're changing it what's changing. Okay, so to get back into the paint weight mode, it's just left click. Now right now the affected area is the size of that red circle. I can change the size of that red circle by holding down B and then dragging left or right to increase or decrease the size of that. So with my leg bent, I ought to be able to adjust some of this weighting information. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, and I'm going to run this cursor over one vertex at a time. So what I need to do, if I want, let's say I want this vertex, and this is the workflow, okay? The workflow is to only ever have 2 influence objects unlocked at a time. Well, on the leg, that's real easy because there's only 2 possible influence objects. But on the sweater, there was a lot more. So the goal is to always add weight. You don't ever want to replace or scale the weight. Those are options for painting weights on other types of objects. They work, but they're not for smooth skin clusters. They're just not very user friendly. So we want to switch to the joint that's not controlling this vertex, and we want to add weight to it. And then I can adjust how much weight I add to it with this opacity and value attributes. So I'm going to turn opacity down to 0.1. I'm going to change my value to 0.5. Okay, so what this means is every time I click and I pass over a vertice, it's going to add 1/10 of the value to that vertex. So there's 1/10 of 1/2. So it moved just a little bit. Every time I cross over it and click, it's going to add 1/10 of 1/2. Okay, now if I click and hold it and drag, every time my cursor bumps against that, it's going to add another 1/10. So I can just click a bunch of times and I can edit this weighting information. It's best to move slow if you're not sure what you're doing, and promise you none of you know what you're doing yet. So I keep adding it in until I feel like the leg looks like a nice shape. Now, the other thing that I'm looking for is I want this mesh, I want the edge flow of my mesh, I want it to be good still, even after I've painted weights. So I need these to stay squarish as much as possible, each face. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to the knee, because these vertices down in here need to be affected more by the knee. So I don't get this mega crease going on back here. And the real pain of weight painting is finding the right point of view. Okay. So now I'm going to switch back to the hip. And remember, I'm always adding to the joint that doesn't have the influence that I want it to have. And I'm just smoothing this out. And see how my edges are kind of getting back to straight? That way I'm kind of controlling my edge flow, but more importantly, I'm getting a good shape out of it. Okay, so let's compare that to this other knee now. See, that already looks a whole lot better. And especially if I smooth it, it's not going to look half bad now. Okay. Now, sometimes, let me undo that move of the other leg. Select this, press 1, press Y to get back to my Paint Weights tool. Sometimes, if you're very careful, you can use this Smooth tool. And Smooth only has an opacity value. So I typically will turn this up to something about like 0.15, between 0.1 and 0.25. Never higher than that. I'm just going to go for the gusto, 0.25. And what this is going to do is it's going to average the weighting information for those vertices, each vertice that I pass over. Now, admittedly, it's really easy to get impatient while doing this. And if I want to add just a little bit to this, then I can do that. to the calf. It's also nice to be able to use the isolate select. So if you come up here and click this, then you can see just the leg or just what you have selected. That can be pretty useful. And you can always switch back and forth between smooth mode and not smooth mode. Okay, so let's say that's how I want it. I'm going to select the knee, middle mouse click, and then I'm going to bend it even further and see if it still looks like how I think it should. So it looks like she's kind of losing the head of her knee right there, you know, that bony part. So we need to get that back in there. So I'm going to left click, press 1, and I'm going to switch to my hip, and I'm going to add to these vertices here to get them to follow the hip more. Press 3, that's a little sharper, that's good. Switch back to the knee, press middle mouse click, and now it's doing a little bit better at the volume preservation for that area. Okay, so anyway, that's kind of your rundown. Okay, I'm going to do one more area. I'm going to set this rotation back to 0. Left click to get back to the weight painting mode. Click on my isolate select toggle button. And with this back at its default position, I'm going to switch back to my selection tool. You'll want to save quite often while you're doing this. It has a tendency to crash Maya, and you certainly don't want to have to do it over again. Okay, so now you don't want to have to do that to both sides of the mesh. So there's a mirror tool for that. So we'll see if it works on separate meshes. I think it will. So if you select them both, go to Skin, modify Mirror Skin Weights option box. If I look at my cursor down here on the bottom left, it's Y on top of Z, so that's the YZ plane. And we want to do it from positive X to negative X. Well, this is positive X. The X handle is pointing out towards positive X. But this is the side that I edited, so we want to uncheck that so it'll go from negative to positive instead of positive to negative. Okay, and the method that we want to use, our surface association, closest point on surface, that's good. These are identical meshes, so it should just get it. Right, the influence association is closest joint first. I like to change that 1 to 1, and then the closest joint. And then we do want it to normalize. Blah, blah. It should already be normalized, but just in case. Click mirror. Now let's see if it really worked. And it did. So that looks a whole lot better than it did before. Okay. Good news. Okay, so now I could say both of my legs are done. Well, let's choose something more complicated. Just a little bit. I'm going to select the hoodie. Actually, I'm going to hide the backpack and its tassel for now. I'm going to select the hoodie, go to my Paint Skin Weights tool, I'll double click on it. Now this one's got a lot more influences on it. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that I lock all the joints. So I go to the top and I select the top joint, scroll to the bottom, shift select the bottom joint, and then I'll click on one of these lock icons and it's going to lock them all. Now when it's locked, it means that the weighting information on the locked influence object cannot be changed. And that's important. Okay. We don't want to edit anything we didn't intend to edit. Particularly when you use a smooth, it smooths out, it averages out the influence of a vertice between all of its different influence objects. So if you have more unlocked than you wanted to, when you hit smooth and you use that brush, it could possibly smooth the weight for that particular vertice so that every joint or influence object is now controlling that vertice. Maya's usually a little smarter than that, but it's a possibility. So we don't want Maya to have to guess. We're just going to control it by locking all the influence objects except for the two we want to edit in between. Okay. Now this is going to work the same way here. Now what I want to do, and the reason that we set the number of influence objects to 1, so we go back to my smooth bind, and I told it max influences of 1. This is where it comes in handy. So if I select the shoulder, it's already nailed that transition for me pretty close. And I don't have to go through and edit that myself. And then I've got the elbow. So it's already segregated quite nicely. So I'm going to lock those, and I'm going to edit the influence, the weighting information in between the elbow and the shoulder. So I unlock both of those. I need to bend the elbow. And I bent it in a way that I'm going so that I can edit the back side. If I wanted to work on the inside of the elbow, right here, then I would actually break the elbow and pull it back. And that way I can see it nice and clear. Okay. I'm going to work on the back first. Left click to get back to my Paint Weights tool. And I'm going to go straight for the smooth. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to press smooth and see what it looks like. So I need to make sure that it looks like there's an elbow inside this sweater right here. So I think what I need to do is switch to my shoulder, and I'm going to add influence to these vertices here. I can increase my brush size a little bit in this area. And I'm trying to create something that looks a little more bony right there. Which I feel like that's kind of doing it. Now, if you want this to be really smooth, you should not be painting weights very often while your mesh is smoothed. Kind of like when you're modeling, if you can get the mesh to look smooth as possible when it's not smoothed, then when you hit smooth, it's going to look really nice. Okay, but if you lie to yourself and work on it while it's smooth all the time, then it's not going to look good. So, for instance, this is good for instance right here. This one's not lining up with its buddies right there. Okay. And decrease my brush size a little bit. I'm going to try to make a crease right in here. Sometimes when you're painting weights, you have to get on the inside of your mesh. And you got to try to figure out what you're looking at. You can also just go to component mode and select the vertices that you need to edit. Press Y, and you can frame them. And then you can see them. It's easier to pivot around them that way. Sometimes your camera point of view is not that awesome. Like when you get too close to objects, they disappear. It starts trimming them from your view. Well, that's not very useful when you're painting weights. So if you select your camera by clicking on this little icon up here in your pane, and then you'll have two attributes. One's called your near clipping plane and one's your far clipping plane. And you'll have to go to the attribute editor and look at the camera's shape. And the near clip plane, I like to go ahead and set that down to something really small. Okay, if you were working on a great big set and you wanted to see what it looked like from really far away, like you want to see the whole city, then your far clipping plane may be a problem. So you could just turn that up to some enormous number so you can see really far off in the distance. Okay. Now I'm going to press, I need to select those vertices again. Press Y. And this might be a case where I can hit smooth. I've only got two vertices selected. And I can turn the opacity, remember the opacity is down low. And I can click flood, and it's just going, it's kind of like I paint over both of these at the same time every time I press flood. So smoothing these out. So that's probably good. When I hit smooth, I got a crease there. That's okay. It should crease right there. Okay. It's not bad. I'm going to select all three of those. They're kind of bunched up right there. Switch back to weight painting mode by pressing Y. And then click flood and watch these straighten out just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to decrease my brush size, switch to add. I'm going to pull this vertice out a little bit. Okay, so I'm kind of re-sculpting my mesh. By controlling the weighting information. Okay. Now, like I said, to paint the front side, you switch back to the elbow, middle mouse click so I can rotate it back. It's going to go to regular object mode. Press Y to get back to the weight painting. And this time, most likely, I need all these to have even weighting so they can be affected all the same amount, I believe. We'll see if I'm right. So to do that, I'm going to switch to my selection tool and go to vertex mode. Press 4. I'm going to select all of those vertices. I'm going to go to Window, General Editors, Component Editor, and for all of these, I need to find the elbow left and the shoulder left. So we can go to this hide 0 columns, probably make it easier. I'm going to select all of these at once and enter 0.5, and now they're all averaged. Okay, so that doesn't look quite like I thought it might when I did that. Okay, so I'm going to deselect some of these, and now they're controlled 50-50 by each. Well, this set, I believe, needs to be controlled more by the elbow joint. So I'm going to drag select all 3 of the elbow joint cells. And then I have this little slider down here at the bottom, and I can drag this over. Oh, brother. I guess it's only going to let me decrease it. Okay, so I'll select the opposite. I want to add influence to the elbow by removing influence from the hip. Or from the... Yeah, why does that say hip? I must have grabbed the wrong ones. Let's just say shoulder. Maybe that's why it looks so bad. Okay. So let's do this. Go to Options, hide 0 columns. Let's grab the hips. Hip left. Set that to 0. And that should have pushed the influence off onto the shoulder and to the elbow. Yeah. Okay. Now we'll go back and hide 0 columns. And we've got elbow left, right, and shoulder. I think this editor's messed up. We kind of found a bug. Because the total's still 1. Oh, wait. Huh. That's weird. So the elbow shouldn't have any at all. So we'll select all those. Press 0. Okay. So I did something weird. Okay, now I'm going to select all these cells. I got the shoulder left, the elbow left. I enter 0.5. Let's see what happens. Okay. That's where it went wrong. Got another bug in Maya. Okay, so let's kill all that. Looks like they destroyed my component editor. It doesn't work like it should anymore. Okay, so I'm going to select each of those. And I only have 2 things unlocked right now. So ideally, I should be able to select that and decrease it. And watch those float towards the elbow, being influenced by the elbow joint until it's nice and even. Okay. So that's good. And then these ones, we probably want it to go to the elbow somewhat. So let's have those bend a little bit as well. Okay. Go back to object mode. Have it be shaded. So let's see what kind of deformation we got out of it. So go to Paint Weights tool, got the elbow selected, middle mouse click. See what it looks like when it comes forward. We'll press 3. So we got a crease there, but ideally these polygons would not collide with each other. I'm trying to decide whether to be that picky or not. I'm going to call it good for our sake, but just so you know, for tutorial sake, typically this is called IP, interpenetration, and you want to avoid interpenetration as much as you can by painting your weights really good. And I could continue to do that until it didn't, but I don't think you want to watch me do it all. So I wouldn't do anything that I haven't already done. Let's continue to edit those weights. Okay. So I think that's it for this tutorial.